I mean, it's Washington. Everyone is going to try to, omit facts or distort facts that go in their favor. And the only reason, especially given like the fact that a lot of these quotes are anonymous, but I'd also say if you just saw that, former press secretary Karine Jean-Pierre just wrote a book, just because someone's on the record does not also mean they're being honest.
I'm sitting here with Alex Thompson, the author of Original Sin, a book that basically broke open the story about President Joe Biden and his fitness during the end of his term. Alex is also a journalist at Axios, one of the most well-sourced people in Washington, D.C. Alex, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, I want to start with the book, Original Sin, which I read, riveting. It was fantastic. I mean, it was filled in a lot of the gaps about some of the stuff we're all trying to piece together in real time. I've heard you say publicly that journalists, including yourself, fell short in covering the decline in Joe Biden's health and the lead up to 2024. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what you think were like the systemic issues that led to that failure.
And the reason I say this, because if we had all been doing our job and had been really on top of it, then the debate performance should not have been as big of a shock as it was to voters and to a lot of reporters. I would say I was probably a little less surprised as someone that was covering the issue than some, but even the extent of the decline because of the way that they were hiding him, I think, was still surprising to me. Now, in terms of like the failures of the media on that, there's the obvious one, which is, there is some like liberal bias in the media. You go to like most newsrooms, I'd say most newsrooms, there's very few people, like in DC, like I'm talking on like Wall Street Journal, New York Times, CNN, like I think there's very few people that probably voted for Trump. And I do think even if you have journalists that are trying to be neutral, I do think that does affect the journalism. But I actually think there's more interesting things than just sort of like an ideological bias that contributed to this. I think, DC and Washington in particular does have a way of, I think, encouraging groupthink. And you've seen this in past reporting failures. Think about like in the run up to the Iraq War and sort of like the post 9/11, we have to defend the homeland, sort of attitude and sort of dismissing skepticism, dismissing questions. I think, in some ways the specter of Donald Trump made it very easy, especially post January 6th, made it very easy for a lot of for the White House comms team, the Biden White House comms team in particular, to deflect important questions because they were just like, well, look at what Trump is doing, which were all legitimate stories, like Trump having, these sort of winding, odd, speeches that sometimes,
it's called the weave.
Yeah, the Hannibal Lecter stuff, the fact that we didn't really know much about Trump's health, like enabled them to deflect. But, and there was a systemic effort by this White House to hide Joe Biden from public scrutiny. But the second that Joe Biden decided that he was going to try to be president till January of 2029, there should have been stories about how his age was affecting his ability to do the job constantly. And while there was a lot of discussion of it as a political liability, there was not as much of a discussion about how it was affecting his ability to do the job.
There were over 200 interviews in the book. A lot of them came post-election, from my understanding. I'm curious how you address concerns about a sort of like retrospective bias or revisionism from the sources. You're talking to somebody, how do you judge the reliability of somebody who's talking after the fact when their motivations have sort of changed?
Yeah, I mean, it's the reason why we spoke to over 200 people, because people's motivations are always suspect. In the same way that their motivations were suspect before the election too,
right.
And before Joe Biden dropped out, their motivations were suspect. Like people were not being candid and honest before Joe Biden dropped out, then after he dropped out, then after the election. I mean, it's Washington. Everyone is going to try to, omit facts or distort facts that go in their favor. And the only reason, especially given like the fact that a lot of these quotes are anonymous, but I'd also say if you just saw that, former press secretary Karine Jean-Pierre just wrote a book, just because someone's on the record does not also mean they're being honest. So the only way you can really correct for it is if you have as many possible sources as you can, which is why we, blew up all of our holidays and interviewed over 200 people in like 12 weeks. And it was to try to correct for that, but it's the right question. And, there was stuff that we didn't include in the book because we weren't sure of the people's motivations. And there were some people that had more to lose by admitting things that were still deflecting. And so, it was sort of one of those processes that me and my co-author, Jake Tapper, sort of just went through, and we shared, like, who do we trust, who do we not, who seems to be candid, who's not. And it was, that's sort of like the part of reporting that, still can't get, replaced by AI is sort of that judgment call.
I'm curious, given the book and, your role at Axios, to what changes do you think the media should be considering? I know it's hard to talk about the media as a monolith, and I hate talking about it as a monolith, but like the way the press covers the presidency, I guess, how can you be sure that you're not sort of getting caught in these kind of inside track blind spots where maybe you're too close to the story almost with the access journalism?
One of my bosses, Mike Allen, has this expression that he tells us all the time. He's like, if you only write what they want, they never have to deal with you. And I think there is this, I've heard it in newsrooms I was in. I've heard colleagues say like, well, if we write this, we're going to lose access. People do say that, like, or they're going to punish us. Or they're going to do, A, B, or C. And I think you just got to be like, who cares? I think, especially in this environment, access means increasingly little because you are seeing principals go to outlets that are ideologically friendly or safe places. And it's not just Democrat or Republican phenomenon, it's everything. You even see it with like celebrities where it's, they used to do like the Oprah sit down, the 60 Minutes sit down. Now they'll just like film their own video and release it, to the public or do an Instagram post. And it's the same thing with, with the White House is that, I very rarely even went to the press briefing because you didn't learn anything.
Yeah. What's the point?
Yeah. And, I was able to report for 4 years on Joe Biden, and I never got to interview him. Like, there are ways to cover a presidency. And in fact, it's like very liberating, I think, as a reporter, if you say, listen, I'm going to write no matter what, and I'm going to try to give you a fair shake. And but like I think this timidity of, well, if we write X, though it's true, they're going to cut off access. I do think is something like reporters have got to get over.
I presume you tried to interview President Joe Biden.
Of course.
I'm curious why you think that never happened, or what your perspective is on why they wouldn't let him sit down with somebody like you.
Well, over the course of 4 years, and for the book, I would say that the reason, especially by the last 2 years, is that he was not really capable of performing well in tough interviews. And honestly, this is the thing that, that the earliest sign that something was up, and that the people around Biden knew it. Because if you'd been in D.C. recent decades, Biden used to be the easiest quote in all of Washington. Like, literally, reporters would see him in the hallways in the Senate and walk the other way because they knew that they were going to be trapped talking to him for 45 minutes to an hour. And at the end of his first year, and I wrote a piece about this at the Times, this is end of 2021, he had done the fewest interviews of any modern president over the course of the first year. And almost all of them were just very friendly. He still, at this point, is the only president in modern history that never did an interview with reporters at the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, or Reuters. So that signals to me that there had been a change in his ability to communicate. And, people will be like, well, his judgment was fine. Well, I mean, they don't know, right? If there is a significant enough decline that he can no longer speak articulately on a consistent basis, that suggests a change in his cognitive function. And, over the course of the presidency, he became more and more isolated from the press beyond, occasionally he would just do he'd walk by reporters and answer a question or two.
All right, I want to bring this to the present right now. I mean, as we're sitting here, it's late October. We're about 9 months into President Donald Trump's second term. You guys have been doing some incredible reporting on Trump, and I read the Axios newsletter every morning. And I think Mike Allen, who you mentioned, and Jim Van Hyde, they've co-written a few columns about like the ways in which Trump is pushing executive power, changing the presidency a bit, citing some of your reporting. I'm curious what you're hearing from Republicans off the record in a broad sense about this moment. Like, are there concerns about how far Trump is going, or do you feel like the Republican senators, Republicans in Congress are just kind of on board along for the ride? Like, what's the vibe like? Because at this point, I don't see much pushback publicly, I guess, and I'm wondering what maybe they're saying privately or off the record.
The vast majority of Republicans are completely on board with what Trump is doing, the expansions of federal power. And it is different than Trump's first term, where I would say, majority or maybe more than that, off the record, they'd be like, we don't like what's happening. And you even had a few go on the record and really complain about it. But that's not really the case here. Now, there are a few voices who have expressed, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, who has a libertarian streak. He has been very outspoken about his concerns about Trump's, unilateral strikes on alleged, drug vessels and boats. Basically saying that is not constitutional. Like there is Congress has not declared war on Venezuela. And they're not exactly giving us the evidence of they're using in order to justify these strikes. But Rand Paul is in a minority in Congress, and you are seeing one of the biggest expansions of presidential power, certainly the biggest expansion in our lifetimes. And it's interesting too that Donald Trump rose in large part as in opposition to the W. Bush legacy, but he and his team are using many of the post 9/11 powers in order to justify a lot of what they're doing and use them in a bigger way. When they call these people alleged narco-terrorists, that's not a mistake. It's not just a political language; it is a legal justification.
Yeah, it seems like every presidency, the power gets bigger and bigger for the executive branch. And this presidency is happening at sort of an accelerated rate. I guess kind of related to that, the Republican Party maybe isn't expressing these kinds of concerns. You talk to Democrats who are on the record obviously being outspoken in opposition to Trump and these expansion of powers. Do you hear anything differently from them off the record than you do on the record, or is it pretty similar in a broad sense in terms of like their criticisms and what they're worried about?
I think probably the biggest difference in terms of public versus private rhetoric, I think Democrats right now, that they feel very free to criticize Donald Trump and they do so on the record. I think there are a few places where Democrats are being a little bit more timid than their private rhetoric is, and that especially comes with illegal immigration and stuff relating to trans rights. Democrats feel, and you can see this in the rhetoric, they feel that both those issues cost them the last election, or hurt them in the last election. And they don't quite know what their vision is on either issue. You see Democrats criticize ICE for being masked. You see them criticize occasional actions and overreach, but they don't necessarily criticize the the expansion of deportations. And you don't see, and now you're seeing with, trans women in sports, they're often saying it's sort of a local issue. So, but I think privately, there is deep concern about how Donald Trump is conducting these deportations, including deporting people, in some cases, who have been here for decades and do not have much of a criminal record.
Right. I just saw this week Steve Bannon, this video came out yesterday, insisting to The Economist in an interview that Trump was going to find a way to run in 2028. I'm curious what you make of this stated goal. If you read somebody like Steve Bannon just being a provocateur, sort of trollish, some people dismiss it that way, or if you think there's real intent there.
I mean, Steve Bannon is a attention monger, and he says a lot of things. That means that he is an ally of the president. He just talked to the president, and truth is, I don't know. I mean, the Constitution is pretty clear on this matter, and I would find it very difficult for them to get around it. And I think for Trump, you don't want to be a lame duck. And so you sort of want to keep winking at the possibility. But he has also talked about J.D. Vance being a compelling candidate and Marco Rubio being a compelling candidate. But Trump is always going to push the bounds of legality in every way he can. And, after the midterms next year, it'll be interesting to see how he navigates that in order to make sure that he is not a lame duck. But also, Donald Trump is 79. I find it, and he's in okay health based on their own reports, but I find it difficult to believe he would be president 7 years from now.
Yeah, it'd be 82 at the end of this term, I think. So signing up for 86 if he gets reelected. It feels unrealistic to me, too, putting aside the kind of constitutional issues. All right, so, the book, I think, is evidence a little bit of the fact that reporters like you, and certainly when I was doing, political beat reporting, you kind of gravitate towards certain stories, and sometimes you'll spend months or a couple of years sort of, following, circling a particular genre or beat. And I think, a couple of years ago for you, that was Biden's fitness. It was something you did a ton of reporting on. I'm curious right now, what sort of stories you feel like you're being drawn to, the stories that you're keeping your eye on with this administration?
Certainly within the administration, I think the level of potential perceived corruption and self-dealing with members of the Trump family and Trump allies is pretty extraordinary. And, it is, I guess, and it's hypocritical based on, Republicans spent the last, I think, with fair reasons, of criticizing Hunter Biden being on the board of a Ukrainian natural gas company while his dad controlled the Ukrainian portfolio. But you are seeing, this just happened today where, Don Jr. was put on the board of a drone company, late last year. And that drone company just got a huge Pentagon contract. And, they're saying, well, he never did anything. He didn't like it directly, but he was put on the board for a reason. I'm not sure it's because of his expertise in drone technology. And, there was another instance of a pharmaceutical company that he is also on the board of. And you also saw, this last week where Trump wants the DOJ to pay him back, in his argument, $200+ million for the legal cases against him from the Biden era, which would be the Justice Department, his own Justice Department, giving him over $200 million. So, I think given the level of Biden crime family labeling and argument about, if not outright corruption, certainly perceived corruption, I think the hypocrisy on that is fairly blatant. The other thing, it's on the Democratic side, it's a party in some ways, it's hard to know how to win when you don't know how you lost. And there's so many theories about why the Democrats lost that you are seeing this sort of vacuum of leadership in a way that's like very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, with regards to the self-dealing in the Trump administration, I mean, that's all without even touching the crypto stuff, which seems totally, I mean, to me, it feels like something that would be a huge scandal in any other administration, but it's almost so out in the open that nobody really is spending much time kind of getting upset about it.
Yeah, or Amazon paying tens of millions of dollars for a Melania documentary.
Yeah.
While Jeff Bezos is very interested in having his space company, compete with SpaceX, and he obviously has lots of other regulatory concerns. I mean, there's and the way that every single big CEO in the country has basically made the sojourn to the White House to present Trump with some sort of gift or public announcement that's politically useful, I think speaks to the very transactional nature of this White House.
All right. I want to look ahead. I know this is a long way off, but 2028 is going to happen. Whether Trump runs again or not, there will be another election, God willing, I hope. I'm curious what you're hearing about the top prospects in the Democratic Party, because that is, I think, going to be a huge part of the story, is like who sort of takes the mantle now that Joe Biden is like actually out of the picture. Seems like the one sure thing is Gavin Newsom, who I know you and I are going to talk about a bit tonight. We're here in California recording this, but aside from him, who it just seems obvious he's throwing his hat in the ring, like what are you hearing in terms of who is kind of, positioning themselves for that race, which I'm sure is going to be insane and a huge deal to the Democratic Party, that primary race?
I've covered a few presidential elections now. I've never seen one start this early and out in the open. Now, usually, people are running, for 4+ years when they actually are running. But there used to be sort of this gentleman's agreement that you would do it sort of subtly, a lot of it behind building relationships, all these things. But now, people are very out in the open, not denying their ambitions and making it, trying to sort of, compete for that attention economy. So you asked for names, though. So Gavin Newsom, obviously, Pete Buttigieg has definitely been doing like his, round of, sort of the Manosphere podcast, really, and also, campaigning for candidates, endorsing particular candidates. Burning the call lines. You have, I think Kamala Harris isn't very pointedly not ruled it out. Whether or not, she see that there will be a path for her, but I think this book tour in part was sort of an attempt at a soft relaunch or a rebrand, reintroduction. And then you have like a lot of governors. So you have Andy Beshear in Kentucky, a Democrat that can win in Kentucky. You have Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, who won very easily last time and looks to do so again. You have Wes Moore in Maryland. You have J.B. Pritzker in Illinois. You have Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan. And then you have the senators, all of which, I think are interested. Cory Booker is going to be in New Hampshire next month. Ro Khanna from California also has been making as many trips to South Carolina as possible. And then, the sort of interesting question mark for a lot of Democrats is Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because, and her team is basically at the moment setting her up for maximum optionality, is what they would call. So she is campaigning in upstate New York to, build up her statewide presence, potentially primarying Chuck Schumer in 2028. But she also has been rallying around the country, and she has been her team has been very methodical about building up her grassroots fundraising operation in a big way. And the thing is that if she were to run for president, she is at the moment the most clear, inheritor of Bernie Sanders. She would inherit a lot of his support immediately. Most strategists think she would easily raise $100 million. And, you know, if you have that option, someone put it to me this way. It's like, if you have the option to be a top 4 presidential candidate, most people don't say no. And so, you know, I think that's really, you know, interesting. That's sort of the field as we know it right now. But as Donald Trump has proven, outsiders are welcome in America right now.
Fascinating. All right, Alex Thompson, thanks so much for your time. Looking forward to chatting more tonight and appreciate you sitting down with us.
Thanks, man.
Yep.